This screencast is about the ancient Egyptian site now called Amarna, once the home of Pharaoh Akhenaten and his wife, Queen Nefertiti. Known since its discovery by the early travelers of the 18th century, the site of Tel el Amarna was first described by a Jesuit priest in 1714, and illustrations were later published in 1821 in Napoleon's Les Descriptions d'Egypte. In the 19th century, Amarna was subsequently explored by Egyptologists Gardner Wilkinson and Richard Lepsius, but it was the discovery by a local villager of the Amarna letters in 1887 that energized European interest in the site. The letters were a cache of over 300 clay tablets written in the Akkadian language in cuneiform script. They are diplomatic correspondences between the King of Egypt and kings, mayors, and others in neighboring countries. This image shows a letter from King Aziru, leader of the Amurru, stating his case to Pharaoh. A few years later, in 1891, the Egypt Exploration Society sent Egyptologist Sir Flinders Petrie to the site, along with an assistant, Howard Carter, who would later discover in 1923 the tomb of King Tutankhamun, the son of Akhenaten. Petrie and Carter excavated the Correspondence Hall in the central city, where the Amarna letters were found, and they also discovered the Great Aten Temple, the Royal Palace, the King's House, and many other buildings, both official and private. A few years later, between 1907 and 1914, German archaeologist Ludwig Borchardt excavated in some of the private homes and workshops. In the house of the sculptor Thutmose, he found the famous bust of Nefertiti, now in the Berlin Museum. Here is a recreation of what Thutmose's house and workshop would have looked like in 1345 BCE. After World War I, between 1921 and 1936, the Egyptian Exploration Society once again excavated at Amarna, on teams headed by Sir Leonard Woolley, John Pendlebury, and others. Modern excavations began in the 1970s and have continued until today under the direction of British archaeologist Barry Kemp from Cambridge University. Before exploring a new sector of the city, Kemp's team take aerial photographs of the site using a balloon. Then, they do field surveys by surface walking, recording the artifacts which are found and noting any area that looks interesting. In places of particular interest, detailed surveying is then done using a total station to map out the terrain. Mapping is followed by magnetometer studies to discover the remains of buried walls and foundations in the area of interest. Next, test trenches are dug, and the stratigraphy and artifacts discovered are photographed, recorded, and entered into the total station. Thus, a three-dimensional database of what lies on the surface and below is recorded. Depending on what is found, the team may continue to dig, following walls and foundations, or they might backfill their trench and try again in another spot. As well as undertaking excavations, Kemp's team also stabilizes and preserves exposed structures. This activity requires conservation specialists who are able to replicate ancient building techniques. In areas that will be left exposed, reconstructed low walls are placed on their gypsum foundations to help visualize what the buildings looked like when they were originally built. Not only have royal buildings undergone preservation and restoration, some private homes have been studied and restored to show how their occupants lived. This wealthy noble's house had an entry flanked by 4 columns, a receiving room with 2 columns, and 2 throne-like seats for the master and mistress of the house, and numerous rooms for sleeping, storage, washing, and cooking. Amarna is a massive site, with rock-cut tombs on the cliffs in the north, a northern palace, a central city, a southern city with ceremonial buildings and temples, a royal tomb far up the central Wadi or valley, southern rock-cut tombs of officials, and a huge workers' cemetery containing some 5,000 graves. This important site is threatened by the expansion of the nearby village. It is one of the goals of the Egyptian Antiquities Organization to make Amarna more accessible to tourists on day trips out of Cairo, and it is hoped that an increase in tourism will ensure that the modern village's reap the economic benefits of this tourist traffic, and thus support keeping modern village structures away from the ancient site. With the current instability in Egypt, it is unknown if this will be successful. I hope you will one day have an opportunity to visit Amarna and see for yourself Egypt's capital city during the reign of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. Thanks for listening.